What's good, everybody? I'm Jay Webb, and welcome to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, my goal is to give listeners a variety of perspectives and insights from sales leaders who have a proven track record of exceeding expectations for themselves and their teams, realizing, of course, that not one person has all of the answers. And like always, my company, the J. David Group, is sponsoring this podcast. So until I get other sponsors, I will hold this spot. My company helps high-growth software companies recruit top software sales leaders and salespeople. So go to the jdavidgroup.com/hiring to learn more, or go to the jdavidgroup.com/looking if you're looking for your next big challenge. Now, my guest today is Kate Weir. She is the North American SVP of Sales and General Manager of iMotions, which is a complete software solution for carrying out human behavior research for academia and business. Kate, welcome to Over Quota.
Thanks, Jay.
So let's just start there. Explain what I just said when it comes to the research and data that you help people with through human behavior.
Yeah, that's a very common question. So I usually start with human behavior research. So is done in academia and it's done in business as well, in a variety of different domains. So that might look like psychology research or mechanical engineering research, or even business school research in academia, neuroscience research, etc. In corporate America, that might look like communications testing, product R&D, user experience type work. And within the human behavior umbrella, there are a variety of different techniques that people have used for a long time to assess consumer, user, populations. A lot of those rely on asking people questions, so survey questions or focus groups and things like that. But academia, particularly in more of the psychology side and the neuroscience side of things, has for a number of years used what we refer to as like biometric or neuroscience-based or psychophysiologic response methods. So things like eye tracking and skin sweat and EEG and brain waves. And those have become more and more popular in corporate markets as well, to just deepen out your understanding of human behavior and what people are experiencing as they're interacting with communications, products, brands, and different experiences. So our company, iMotions, has a software that really focuses on those psychophysiologic responses and enabling researchers to do that with greater ease. They're advanced technologies, and not everybody has a neuroscience degree, so we try to make it easy so that you can incorporate a variety of these different point solutions in a single platform.
And so speaking on the business side, if, let's say, for instance, I'm a product marketing manager or someone, and I have a product and I want to see how people interact with that product, so to speak, in addition to the feedback that they're giving me verbally and saying, yes, I like this, I don't like this, and all that stuff. You're looking at the biometrics of it all and seeing how I'm reacting to certain aspects of the product, and then basically informing your decisions on that as well. Is that accurate? Or
exactly.
Right.
Nailed it.
Got it. Okay, cool. It's amazing that, obviously we talked about academia and business, but I feel like there's so many other applications. Like, I don't know why my mind just went to this, but like, let's just say, for instance, even like some sort of, especially now, right, with everybody working from home, if I'm a lawyer and I want to use a peremptory challenge, I think it's called, when, you're talking to prospective jurors and you're like, I don't want this juror to be part of this because of, whatever, right? Because of their background. But, biometrically, it can say that juror's eye motion did something that it's consistent with somebody that's going to be negative towards my client. I don't know why I'm thinking of that, but I just feel like that's pretty cool applications. Okay.
Yeah, the cool thing is there's a lot of really fantastic applications, which is great for us. Also can make our business difficult, right? When we sell to a variety of different clients, doing a variety of different types of research. But to your point, one thing that I have seen done more and more in recent years is political research. So understanding how people are reacting to politicians, stump speeches and campaign ideas and things like that. So that's always very fascinating.
So cool. Maybe even for interviews as well. I could think of which would be interesting. Maybe I'll ask you that a little bit later. So what is your role there? In the role, I guess, as the SVP of Sales and General Manager. Talk to me a little bit about that, and then also, if you can, help us bring me through the Kate Weir backstory. From how you became Kate Weir from the beginning, I guess.
Sure. So as far as iMotions goes, in my current role, I run our client solutions and client success management teams here at iMotions directly, and our solutions team is our sales team. Mm-hmm. And then on the general manager side, so I lead sales here. And then on the GM side, I'm also responsible just for the division, the P&L of the North America. So just about 20 employees across the country, primarily headquartered here in Boston though. So responsible for just the day-to-day operations of the office and things like that.
Got it.
So as far as my backstory, a little bit interesting. So I graduated college the spring after 9/11. So jobs were pretty scarce, and I had a friend who was a recruiter at Sun Life Financial. So I went to work there in a customer service role. And in that role, I was a liaison with the sales team, and I just fell in love with sales. The group was really dynamic. They had a great energy. I really enjoyed working with them. And, but I knew after a certain amount of time that the financial services space just wasn't for me. So I had the opportunity to maybe transition into sales there, and I didn't want to take that. At the time, I was really big into sports and outdoor recreation type stuff. So I ended up finding a local sports apparel company that I really liked, made a lateral move into a customer service position there, but made them aware that I was really interested in sales. And they provided me an opportunity to relocate to the Chicago area when I was very young and take over a territory there, which was great. That was a really fantastic opportunity, and that's where my sales career started. From that role, one of the things that has happened in a lot of the companies that I've worked for, they've been smaller businesses. So what's nice is that I've had the opportunity to get my hands in a lot of different projects and different aspects of the business, and also move up within the organization. So that happened there. I took on a strategic accounts role where instead of just managing an individual territory, I really was responsible for working with the biggest national clients and creating programs that the rest of the sales team could utilize and drive sales at the local level. So I loved that. And after a number of years there, what I found was just that space. I was looking for something maybe a little bit more intellectually stimulating. So I found the market research space, which was really interesting to me, because in market research, you get to work with a variety of different clients on a variety of different initiatives. And it's so cool to really get deep dive understanding of how companies think about their communications and optimizing their packages and their user experiences. So I sold services projects for a number of years, and then was recruited out of that company by someone into the neuroscience space, which is where I've spent the majority of the past decade. And pretty niche space within the market research industry. But I fell in love with it. I found it really interesting. At first I thought, well, I'll never be able to do this. I don't have a neuroscience background. I don't even have a psychology background. But it all just sort of made sense for me, the application of these signals to business questions. And so became very passionate about that, and worked in one organization selling service projects. The platform that we actually used to execute those was iMotions. So now I'm on the software side of things, and trying to get clients to take on this type of work in-house.
Where was your first leadership role? Like what and how did you make that transition from individual contributor to essentially leading a team?
Yeah, so that was actually at the sports apparel company. So I had relocated for 2 years to Chicago. For personal reasons, I needed to relocate out, and there wasn't another territory. So I pitched the company that I was working for a job that I saw that we needed, which was that strategic account management role. So in that case, I sort of indirectly managed the reps against the initiatives that I was putting together and working on. And then additionally at that company, I built out an inside sales team once I was back at headquarters to support the field reps. So that was the.
It's interesting. So you pitched, the job didn't exist, the role didn't exist, and you pitched it based on a need that you saw internally.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. Okay. Cool. 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 And what was it about neuroscience that interested you so much? Like, what was it that sort of grabbed you as opposed to where you were when you first started out selling financial stuff?
Yeah. So it was really, I think one of the things that really struck me was how linked some of these signals and methods are to behavioral outcomes, and really that realization that there's so much that's happening below our conscious awareness that drives our behaviors, our memory, our attention, purchase decisions, and things like that. So just that sort of blew my mind. And I also felt that the team at the company that I was talking to was just super sharp. So between the team itself and the subject matter, I just fell into it.
Got it. Fell into neuroscience selling. Not too many people can say that. I fell into renting cars and selling cars when I came out of college. So I didn't fall into that. That's interesting. All right. What can you remember about your early coaches and mentors early in your career, whether it was within this industry or just generally speaking about sales and leadership, and how did it, play a role in what you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually creates a pretty clear link now that I'm thinking about it. I always gravitated towards operational executives, and I had some pretty strong C-suite executives that took me under their wing and helped me just learn and think about the business in more broad strokes and bigger picture than just sort of my individual job as a salesperson or individual quotas or things like that, and how all of the pieces of the business really have to come together in the right way to be successful, to move the needle on top line revenue and have a successful, efficient, scalable business.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? How have you used that, what you learned from them, into building what you're doing now, and I guess previously in other leadership roles in terms of operationally and otherwise? Like what should we know or other leaders know about how to execute operationally? Yeah,
I think for me it was really that bigger picture thinking that was helpful for me, and I consistently, in each of the organizations that I've gone into, not only have I been focused on the sales work that I was doing, but I really just had an almost like innate ability to look around the company and say, oh, I think we could improve that, or we're losing efficiency here. One way that I describe it is sort of, if there's this push on top line revenue and you're sort of in this big truck, and on the front there's a vacuum, and you're trying to get in as much revenue as you can. That's fantastic. But if you look in the rearview mirror and there's a hole in the tank that holds the money, right? And you're just hemorrhaging that money out the back. That's sort of how I think about things. So how can we make things as efficient as possible? And how can we be as effective as possible? And those things come together in that sort of balance of driving top line revenue and monitoring the bottom line as well.
Answer this if you can, but it's just something that I'm curious about. And if if it requires too much thought, just let me know and we'll move on to another question. But do you have an example of that? Because that's a pretty cool, I guess, metaphor or analogy where, you're pushing towards something, you got this vacuum on one end, but if the gas is leaking out the other end, then you're not being that efficient, right? You could try to run and go as hard as possible, but if you don't have the energy to get to where you want to go, then obviously that's not an efficient way to get to where you want to go, right? So when you came into iMotions, or even that role way back where there wasn't a role that you realized there was an opportunity, and then you created the role for yourself. Like, where were the inefficiencies that you've been able to plug, so to speak, and then what were the results in order to help you get where you want to go, I guess, if you will?
Yeah. In that original role, it really was born out of my own experience as a salesperson. So I could sell to these individual local accounts, but there were these big brand name accounts that it was very difficult to sell to at the local level because those programs were created at the corporate level. And so you spent a lot of time talking to them, and every once in a while you get sort of like piecemeal sales or crumbs, so to speak. I just kept thinking, I'm spending all of this time, I'm just banging my head against the wall. We're just talking to corporate and put a program in place. I could just walk in here with that assortment and, just be more efficient with it. So that was what, was the driver for creating and pitching that role originally. I think in other organizations, it has been just around delivery of projects, as well as sales effectiveness or sales efficiency. So not having the right enablement tools or analytics. So you're just spending so much time doing things. For myself, in roles where I've spent building dashboards or trying to figure out the data I needed to figure out what was actually happening with the sales team and what we needed to work on most. So there's a variety of different ways you can think about inefficiency and everything from operations and the processes and things like that, just down to the everyday, how are you executing with your sales team? And if you were more efficient, could you do it with less people?
Do you come in with that thought process? Like, let's say, for instance, if you were to start with another company tomorrow, maybe going back to when you first started with iMotions, do you come into that saying to yourself, okay, where are the inefficiencies in this sales process or in this organization? Or is it that you come in, roll your sleeves up, talk to the team, get inside the sales process, bump your head up against the wall a number of times and then say, wait a minute, there's got to be a better way. Like, what's your approach? Like, how do you think through that?
Yeah, I think it's a very much a 360 landscaping of the organization when I get in there, kind of assessing what's going on, talking to everybody, what's going on, and from that lens of salespeople, how are you doing? What's working? What's not working? Marketing, same. And then talking a lot about the interactions between groups. Marketing, how is it to work with sales? Sales, how does it work to marketing? What about product and customer success? So just trying to really landscape the organization in its entirety, I think is helpful, and gives you those broader strokes and bigger picture to understand what really needs to be done. Because I find sometimes if you just start talking to one group or you just start thinking about your role and driving sales and you haven't zoomed out, you can get caught up in the narrative of one group or one opinion that might pigeonhole you or send you down the path, like you said, of banging your head against the wall and let me turn around and go this way and figure this out. So I think it's a great approach for anybody coming into an organization to really try to, and as a sales leader, you have to work with those other departments, right? We can always focus on sales effectiveness and efficiency for sure, but you also have to have leads coming in, and you have to, have a strong value prop and collateral, and you have to have a strong product. And the sales and the customer success people are the closest to the customer. So making sure that you're an advocate for that feedback and keeping things collaborative is really important to me.
Speaking of advocating, once you've diagnosed the problem, so to speak, and you realize it's time to execute on it, right? And you've seen things that are inefficient that you want to make more efficient. How do you go about doing that, right? Like, I guess changing those behaviors and changing the way that things are done with a team that had been used to doing it in a different way. Like, how much how much, what's the word I'm looking for? How much of a challenge, I guess, is it for you to headwind, I guess is the word. How much headwind do you have to try to, as you go to that direction and try to change things?
Yes, that can be a very big challenge. It's been a challenge of mine in organizations for sure, especially when you work in smaller organizations that are startup, like real startup mode. And then you have to figure out how to start scaling them, not rapid growth like large enterprise organizations, but you still have to figure out ways to scale. And that can be really disruptive for people. And I think A pitfall of mine has been overconfidence in the past in my own sort of, well, it's obvious to me, this is what we need to do, right? And just maybe trying to push those ideas forward without getting buy-in and consensus, and making sure that everybody who's built what's been there so far feels like they're part of that, because they need to be. And a lot of that, a lot of that research that you do or conversations that you have, you really need to be mindful of that.
And what if it is, what if it's not necessarily the tools, or maybe you become more efficient, and by becoming more efficient, then you need less people. How do you sort of handle that in those conversations? I mean, what's that like?
Yeah, in terms of shifting people around or
shifting people around or shifting people out.
Yeah. That can, that's a challenge in thinking through how companies have been doing things. Thankfully, the organizations that I've been in, we've really just needed to bring new people in. There's been a core team, but one thing that does become apparent is that people need new opportunities. They need opportunities to grow. So if they've been doing the same role and they're ambitious and successful, and a key member of the team, you need to find a growth path for them. And that can be a challenge in smaller organizations. Obviously, there's not always a plethora of roles to move people to. So managing to sometimes those hybrid roles where, well, we'll try to move you in this direction, but we still need you here, can be one way to transcend. And then I think the reality about moving people out is just doing that with as much empathy and rationale as possible, right? It's not personal, but if at the end of the day, a business is a business and it needs to grow, and if someone's dragging the organization or isn't a right fit anymore for some reason, and there's not a place to move them, then you simply have to make those decisions, and you try to make them in the most, the way that helps them land the most comfortably and makes the team still feel stable.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's just broaden it out for a second. Speaking of big picture, we're talking about efficiencies and so the tactics and things that we use, but I guess from a broader sense, and I'm asking this, I guess from my perspective, but then also people who are listening who are, let's say, sales managers, directors of sales, perhaps maybe the individual contributors, and they aspire to, to grow and to become leaders. What do you think is the, a sales leader can do to positively impact top line revenue? And I guess what I mean by that is that they're not selling anymore, right? Now you're relying on other people, so to speak, to execute on the sales process and those types of things, right? Like, how do you get that message down through, especially if you're have directors that are reporting to you and managers that are reporting to those directors? Like, how do you actually impact that top line revenue when you're not selling anymore?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say I have the luxury of working in smaller organizations, so I don't have as much managerial hierarchy. So I've really directly managed a number of the sales team members, and I have an amazing one other manager who handles the academic sales team. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy for me, I would say, compared to others where you're talking about really large sales organizations, to stay close to the team, understand what's working, what's not. I think the best thing you can do as a leader to drive top line revenue is make sure that your team is set up for success. So are they being as effective as possible? If not, how can you get them more effective? Are they being as efficient as possible? What programs and processes can you put in place to get them there? And then also to just be an advocate for them, actually, and an advocate for sales in the rest of the organization. So the closer I can be to product and marketing, the more likely I am going to get the results out of those teams that I know will help drive sales. Right.
And what about you have someone who is, they have the right attitude, they are doing all of the right things, they're putting in a lot of effort, but they're just not necessarily getting to where you want them to get in terms of the results. How do you coach that person and can in with the right attitude, I guess, right, the right approach, they want to work hard and they have the desire, can you help them turn it around, or is it just something else that often just is holding them back?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it really depends on the scenario, but I'm a big advocate of the question, why? So why isn't it working? Does it just come down to an aptitude or a capability thing? One of the things that I see frequently in top performers that maybe is a little bit less talked about than some other things like hustle and grit is passion. And so if someone isn't really passionate and enthusiastic about the product and the value that that brings to clients, for me, I've often seen it doesn't matter if they're doing the right things. It simply might not work because that passion and enthusiasm isn't there, or they just might not have the aptitude for that particular kind of sale, right? Is it transactional versus highly consultative? Is it small business versus enterprise? So just kind of assessing why it doesn't seem to be working, and then looking at them against the things that the attributes that you've assessed really make top performers in your organization, because that looks different for every organization, I think. So assessing it against that for me, and if there are things I think I can move the needle on, then trying to find programs or create processes or pair people up to improve those efforts. Because I think if you're making an effort, it's worth trying on the coaching side.
I've asked this question to folks before. I stopped asking it. Now I want to ask it again, just given what you just said, right? If you have the people and process, I guess, on one, people over here, process over here, and let's say if it's a pie chart, which percentage would you put towards the people and which percentage would you put towards the pie chart in terms of weighting your probability of success, I guess, if you will, right? Which one would be a better, I guess, way to fix whatever it is you need to fix, which would be to get the end result, which would be more sales?
Right.
Convoluted question, I know, sorry.
No, it's good. I would be really curious to know how each of your other guests have answered that. For me, it's nearly 90% people, by and large, vast majority people. I think if you have the right people, then you can overcome not always having the right processes and programs in place. If you don't have the right people, they're often not going to follow those processes anyway.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
I would bet on the people every time.
And that's why I stopped asking it, because that's the answer pretty much I think that everybody's given, which is the people. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe that's just a silly question to ask them, because it seems obvious, I guess, that the people at this point. But I guess the reason why I always bring it up is, and this is cliche, I know, but when you look at, the Belichick way, right? You talk about the Patriots and, he seems to be able to plug anybody in except for the quarterback, and we'll find out what happens this year. And they have always been consistent. Or even in the NBA, if you look at the San Antonio Spurs and the different personnel that they've gone through over a 20-year period of time, but yet they're still always relevant and all that stuff. And it seems to me like the people always change, but the results are always the same, right? They just continue to win, which is, I guess, why I asked that question. But all right, so actually, do you have a comment on that before I go on to the next one?
Yeah, I would say it's important not to undercut the processes for sure, because they absolutely can make things more efficient, which can drive better results, better revenue results for sure. So, but I think the vast majority would agree. People make a bigger part of the pie.
Got it. Okay. So with that said, you mentioned passion as being a component of what makes a stronger salespeople. What else, whether it's a behavior or a trait? Give me a couple of others that you think separate the best salespeople that you've managed from others.
Sure. I'll just jump off passion again a little bit more, because I do think that, one thing a lot of the sales managers look for is people who are constantly learning, right? Constantly want to get better at what they're doing. And whether you're passionate about sales or you're passionate about the product that you sell and or the industry you sell it into, that makes that sort of learning a lot easier. And that's definitely an important thing. I would say another trait for me would be accountability. So people who are proactive, who own their work, their processes, their responsibilities, who are really accountable for themselves and can acknowledge failures or missteps and learn and grow from that. People who can take feedback, I also lump into that sort of accountability bucket. And so those for me, passion and accountability are quite high on the list. The diversity in which we sell, the diversity of clients and different applications in which we sell, I think people just with a strong business acumen. So I had mentioned, I think the market research industry has served me well because I've just learned so much about different businesses and different initiatives within those businesses. And I find that people who have a little bit more well-rounded view of how companies operate and what impact products can make, or what challenges people have, that's a really top skill for me, and is what I see in a lot of the most successful reps.
How do you go about evaluating some of those during the interview process? Like, for instance, somebody that is constantly learning or has a natural curiosity, how can you tease that out in an interview?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to assess that is to ask how much they know about my company and myself. So they know they're going to be interviewing with iMotions. They know they're going to be interviewing with Kate Weir. Did they do any background research? They interested in finding out as much as they could about the company and me so that they could have the best possible conversation. I think that's a really key indicator. And then you can also just ask them what sort of, what's the last thing that you read, the last interesting thing that you read, or what are some of your top publications where you go get information about how to be a better salesperson or how to learn more about the industry and things like that. So that I would say on the knowledge seeking side. Accountability, that for me is, I can assess that a couple of different ways. Sometimes it's just the basics. Do they follow up with an email to thank me for the interview? Do they, in conversations about their past experience, do they seem to own up to some of their mistakes or times that, they haven't hit quota? When I probe on some of those, I mean, anybody can make their sales resume look really sharp and that they've had all the success in the world, but I don't know any salesperson who hasn't missed some goals. And so probing on that, I think, is helpful, and kind of seeing how people talk through that, right? And are they posturing to just say no, or are they really like, hey, this didn't work for me, I tried this, or this was a mistake and I lost sales here because of it, but this is how I learned, grew from the experience.
And it's interesting to hear you say that, because I feel like a lot of candidates, sales people specifically, want to hide their warts, I guess, so to speak, or if they're not hiding it, they're shamefully depicting, the struggles, I guess, if you will, right? Which isn't a good look either, right? You're honest, but you're slouching, and it's just sort of like, woe is me. So, like, how should candidates navigate through that part of the conversation? If, let's say, for instance, they've come to you and they're sitting in front of you, or they're talking to you on the phone, and they had a bad quarter or two, and they either were let go or in jeopardy of getting let go, or maybe they're still there, but they're just really struggling. What are you listening for, I guess, during that part of the conversation, knowing that salespeople will struggle from time to time, that will give you confidence to say, okay, like, I still want to move forward with this person, at least to the next round, or perhaps make them an offer?
Yeah, I think just some level of authenticity and, a genuineness to the conversation, where you don't feel like it's just over posturing, and you don't feel like it's just excuses for why. I think I actually like to hear salespeople and ask them, like, tell me about a time you didn't hit your quota. What happened? What did you learn from that? And I think just listening for how they talk about that, and the growth op is key, right? How did they learn from it? How did they pivot? And do they seem really sincere in that way. There's times that salespeople, I think, tend to, they might be trying to sell themselves, so they don't want to get into that at all. But being able to have that level of authenticity that makes me feel like, wow, they're really thoughtful about what worked and what didn't work, and that they, even if they are, I guess it's some sort of balance that I can't really articulate well, right? Like, even if they are, if they're giving you reasons that might seem like excuses for why sales didn't work, there are always impediments for salespeople within their own organizations, right? And it's almost like we're not allowed to say that, or it comes off as excuses why we didn't hit our number, right? But sometimes the product just needs improvement, or the leads just, the quality isn't there, right? But if you can talk about that in a way that says, these were the challenges that I have, and here's all the things that I tried to overcome them, and I didn't feel like I could, so I'm looking for something else. That's just sort of, there's something sort of authentic and genuine about that I appreciate, and I think is really good for salespeople to acknowledge in the sales process and recruiting process.
Yeah, and to your point, I think the flip side of that is the posturing who, when they aren't necessarily acknowledging, the challenges and failures, and they're trying to talk through them in a way that isn't authentic. And then you can't really get a sense of who they are and how they think and how they overcome challenges. And then it's defeating, I think, from a hiring perspective. It's like, man, like, I was really wanting this person to show me who they were, and they didn't, because I think they have potential, but you just end up losing confidence in that way.
Absolutely. And that's critical from the jump, I think, between a manager and a salesperson, is building that rapport and trust. I mean, sales managers have to have difficult conversations, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that foundation of trust and rapport with someone, it just makes it more difficult than it needs to be for both sides, I think. But yes, to your point, and I don't want to feel like I'm being sold, right? I've changed the name, my title is sales, but I've changed the name of our team to solutions, because it really is a consultative sale. And I found that our clients are more receptive to that approach. So I'm looking for people who can have a conversation and be genuine and make connections. And if that posturing is there and that feeling like I'm being sold, it's definitely not going to be the right fit, unfortunately.
I'm going to go to a gender related question, only because I have my own, well, I'm actually not even going to lead the question, I guess, but I'll ask it this way. Do you see a difference when you're sitting with a woman or sitting with a man in terms of the way that they approach those questions, or do you find it to be the same?
It's a good question. I do hate to generalize, but I would say I find female candidates tend to be a little bit more authentic and less really like that over promotion and selling of themselves, where I've seen more male candidates. I've seen those traits more on the male side of things than the female side of things.
Yeah. All right. Well, now I'll interject my opinion, I guess, which is that I agree. I think that I'll just say this. When I have a woman that is interviewing at a client of mine, I'm much more relaxed about it, frankly, because I just feel that they're going to be more prepared. I feel like they are going to be just more authentic. By the way, no offense to you men that are out there, like the sales guys that are out there. I mean, you're 95% of my market, which I'll get into in a second, but it's just a reality, And I think it's just a communication style. I think it's just the way the way that we communicate and the way that we engage with people, I think, as human beings. And I really do feel like, when I have a female candidate, woman, I very seldom do I feel like my clients, or me, frankly, for that matter, are going to have a bad experience where it's, oh man, I can't believe, she said that or something. I don't know. I just wanted to put that out there for sure. You mentioned sales managers obviously have tough decisions to make, and they're making tough decisions all the time, whether it's personnel, whether it's process and whatever. But and we talked about the differences between best salespeople. that you've led and that you've managed. What about best sales manager, whether it's practices or behaviors, traits that either, maybe that you have or perhaps that you want to see in other people as well?
Yeah, from a managerial standpoint versus a kind of leadership standpoint, consistency comes to mind. I mean, I think consistency is key. Yeah, so much of what sales is repetitive, right? It's making sure we're doing the right things, we're following the steps, we have a process. Where is that potentially breaking down? Where is it not? And just the consistency of having those conversations, the consistency in, what the strategy is, all the way from the top down, I guess, right? Like, so what's the strategy? That needs to be consistent. How do you manage people against the strategy? That needs to be consistent. All things. So are there consistent ways that you give feedback and ask for feedback and engage your people? So I would say consistency is key. Even in things like, I find this is actually something I struggle with, wearing multiple hats that I wear, and also being client facing in some cases myself as well, is moving meetings and what that signals to your people. And I think that's something a lesson that I've learned really the hard way is I have to be consistent about holding those meetings. And I need to make sure that I prioritize that for the people that I'm managing. And I think that consistency really goes a long way.
The lack of consistency, what's the detriment to that when you don't have that consistency? What's the flip side of that? How does it negatively impact the morale, culture, sales team, results, all that stuff?
Yeah, in so many ways, right? People just aren't beating to the same drum. You can't expect somebody, if you are coaching or managing someone and there's something you actually have to coach them on doing better, it makes it really difficult to do that if you're not consistently checking in or asking them to do things in the same way, right? They're always kind of adapting to the next new thing that the manager's talking about or that the company is doing. It becomes really demotivating. I think people the companies that I've seen really like to feel this sense that the company has this mission and we're all working together, right? And then even within your department, the sales team, we're all in it together. So the lack of consistency, I think, can erode just at a broad stroke level, people's ability to be excited and passionate about what they're doing, and then to be effective for sure. And I think on the sales management, it can lead to a lack of effectiveness in the salespeople, and it can lead to a lack of credibility with the sales manager, right? If I'm talking to a sales manager and we're talking about different things every time I get on the phone or get in person, then that's pretty demoralizing. And I don't necessarily, again, it kind of goes back to building that trust and rapport that someone can really help me grow and work on the things that I need to do to be the best salesperson I can be.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had a sales manager once who I love. I mean, he's like a brother to me now, but he wasn't very consistent with meetings. So we'd have a meeting or we'd have a meeting scheduled and the meeting would change and we wouldn't have the meeting for a couple of weeks. It's like one of those things. And I feel like I just wrote down when you were saying that, it's like a lack of belief from the sales team, right? It's like they don't really believe, if they don't believe that you're going to hold a meeting every Tuesday at 10 a.m. anymore, then they're probably not going to believe a lot of the other things that you're gung-ho about, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And, I really believe that this is the direction we're going to go in. And we talked about operational efficiency earlier in the conversation. And it's one of those things, if you're actually trying to make a big change and you're not consistent with some of the little things, then it's going to be hard to make that big change because people aren't necessarily going to believe you. And to your point, you don't necessarily have the credibility for them to say, yep, we're going to hitch our wagons to Kate on this one because we know that she's going to steer us in the right direction,
Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head, that belief, they need to believe in their leader. But also to your point, if the meeting's not happening consistently, well, they're not very invested in preparing for it, right? You get into a meeting and no one's really invested in it a lot of time because they weren't even sure if the meeting would happen. So yeah, I think that's consistency is a really key thing for me.
Yeah, and just a note to raising kids, I feel like, so there's this book that I read. I read it because it was a marketing book. It was called, I don't know if I have it back. It's called Persuasion. No, it was called, yeah, Persuasion, the Art of Influence by Robert Cialdini. It's
I'm
an
gonna write that
awesome
down.
book. Yeah, you should. It's an awesome, awesome book. Persuasion, the Art of Influence by Robert Cialdini. And I think he was a psychologist, right? Speaking of behavioral and neuroscience, he basically did a whole bunch of, I think he did primary research himself, but then he also, aggregated other research as well. And one of I think there's like 7 weapons of persuasion, I think. And one of the 7 is like that consistency, and I read this book probably a couple years ago when my kids were probably 5 and 3 roughly. And again, I read it for marketing initially, but it spoke to me just in terms of, making sure that my kids behaved well and all that stuff. And it's just something as simple as being consistent with what you expect of them in certain things in certain times, and never relenting on that. Just always just sort of reminding them. Something as simple as when you leave the bathroom, shut off the light, right? And don't ever go and shut it off for them, right? It's like, Jada, you forgot to shut off the light. You forgot to shut off the light. And, eventually it becomes a habit for them, and then they go and do it, right? And I feel like that's important. Or, letting them get away with something that, today you let them get away with it, tomorrow you don't, and tomorrow, the next day you do again. And it's the same thing. You end up losing control. And one of the things he said in the book is that, that's why countries or sectors of countries will rise up against the government in so many cases, because there's just so much that wasn't there before that is there now, and it's just not consistent. And so it's just a roller coaster, if you will, and it just becomes a bureaucratic mess, I guess, if you will, right? So there's just so many ways consistency is applicable through society, So that's,
yeah, it's critical to that alignment you were talking about, right? Whatever your constituency group is, whether
right,
children,
right.
whether that's politics,
Right.
or whether it's your sales team.
Right.
I like a little shock value now and then too. My stepson kept continuously putting his shoes on the rug right in front of the door, so
Right.
he would always trip over them. And I must have said it 10 times, and then I told him, the next time you do it, I'm just going to throw him outside.
Yes.
And I did, and he's never done it since. So consistency, and maybe sometimes a little shock value.
Yeah, and I'll also say follow through, right? In other words, because that's what you did,
Yeah.
right? That's the thing, right? If you're going to say, next time you do it, I'm going to throw it away, you better do it, because then they're not going to listen. It's the same thing, I think, with managing as well, right? It's like, you expect things, and then you're going to inspect them. And if they don't do it, then, there's going to be, some sort of consequence to that somehow, So
Yeah.
that's really important.
And it's hard to create those consequences, or to have people aligned to consequences, if you're being inconsistent, right?
Yes.
So, like, how do you hold people accountable?
That's right.
To that, if you're not even staying on top of what you've asked them to do, so.
That's right. And that's one of the things you said is passion, consistent, constantly learning, and then accountability. So that goes for managers and individual contributors as well. All right.
Absolutely.
Just one more questions, then I want to get to the rapid fire 5. But I want to go back to gender for a second, because, one of the things as a headhunter, I've been doing this specifically for high growth software companies for 14 years now, almost 15 years. And one of the things that's been coming up, I'd say certainly over the last couple of years, or maybe even the last 5 years, has been like, Jay, we really would love to have a woman for this role, right? We really need to have a woman. Like, I had one person say, like, I don't want you to send me anybody but like non-white men. That's what we want, right? I want a woman, and I don't want people that look like me. And it was because, to his point, it's harder beyond that to create a diverse culture and to have different ideas and all that stuff, if when people are looking up and they don't see a woman who's the SVP of sales or something like that, right? And it just becomes harder to do if they're sitting around the table and all you see is just just sort of a, this one profile, I guess, if you will. And so always, and one of the reasons why, what I'm trying to do on this podcast too, as well, is bring more women on, because I think like my first 8-9 interviews or something like that were men. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm doing exactly what, everybody else does, right? And like, there's got to be, some really strong sales leaders that are out there that I can bring on. So I'm happy that that you're here with me. But I guess the question becomes is, what is it? Is it systemic? Is that why there are less women in software sales? And if it is, how can we change that? And, how do we find more women, or at least encourage more women to choose software sales as a career?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a complex answer, complex scenario, right? So I don't think there's one silver bullet, but I may have alluded to it before. For me, it's just changing the connotation of sales. I always felt, as excited as I was to be in sales and the things that drove me about it, I never really liked saying I was in sales or that I was a salesperson. Because the context associated with that for me was pushy, that I was just trying to sell you my product and I didn't care what, whether or not you got value out of it. I was out for my number, I was out for myself, and things like that. And I think there's been a long, Glengarry Glen Ross, like there's just been a long history of these sort of really competitive, aggressive stereotypes around sales that a lot of women don't identify with. So I think there's a lot happening, which is great, with women supporting other women and diversity programs and making sure that we're being more inclusive, but just changing the dialogue about what sales is, because it is also a very different thing than it was decades ago. People have so much choice now and they're inundated with so much messaging. You really need to be able to make connections and consult with people and become that really cliche, but the trusted advisor, right? So that they believe what you're saying. You steer them towards things that make sense and away from things that don't. I mean, I've had many conversations with clients where I've said, I don't think this is the right fit for you to bring in-house based on what you're telling me, which has only given me more credibility. And I've worked with them in other organizations that I've been in. So for me, it's some way about framing and just continuing to talk about sales in a way that can, do away with some of those older stereotypes that perhaps women don't orient to quite as well. I think that's key.
Yeah, it's like my wife, I think, has all the traits and capabilities to be a phenomenal salesperson, but she has that negative connotation. And we actually met it, and I mentioned the rental car place. It was Enterprise Rent-A-Car way back like 20 years ago, and we were selling like collision damage waiver, right? And it was such a that's all that was. Talk about a transactional sale, right? Something like point of sale for like $10, telling people that they're going to crash, don't better get this or you're going to crash your car, right? It was just such a weird, it's just you don't want to be selling like that for sure. And now where selling is so much information based, and to your point, trusted advisor and consultative, there's so many skills that, that machismo or that Glengarry Glen Ross type stuff, when you're trying to win steak knives and those types of things, just don't equate anymore, at least not in enterprise sales, and certainly not in solution software sales for sure. And certainly not if you're selling a neuroscience product solution. That's for sure. Okay, cool. Yeah, there's so much more we could say about that, but I know we're running out of time, and I want to be respectful of your time, and of course the people who are listening in their car, who their commute just might be coming to an end, or lack of commute, maybe their gym, their run, something like that at this point. But all right, so the rapid fire 5, where I ask you 5 questions. Give me just a simple answer and move on to the next one. So you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Your favorite sales enablement tool is what?
Any performance analytics tool. Insight Squared.
I use them, by the way. It's an awesome tool. I've used them in the past. One thing that helps you stay productive and focused?
Meditation.
I'm a big proponent of that too. Do it every morning. That's pretty cool. I love to meet other people that meditate. Best strategy / advice to help people find their next job?
Seek out things that you are passionate about and enthusiastic about, and figure out a way to stand out. I think for me, that is just reach out to the sales manager directly on LinkedIn. There's so much access now to information about who the leaders are in these organizations. If it's something that you're passionate about, tell a good story and you know, get their attention that way instead of going through standard recruitment processes.
Love it. Speaking of that, which would you prefer, a cold email or a cold call from someone looking for a job right now?
Cold call, hands down. It's an email world we're living in. If someone takes the initiative to call me, they automatically have a leg up.
Love it. And are you hiring? And if so, which positions, and how can people get in touch with you?
Unfortunately, I'm not currently hiring. The COVID situation and current events have slowed our sales as a lab software tool, but I'm hoping that that trend will turn around in Q4 and certainly by Q1 of next year. So always open to talking to people. However, so the best way to connect with me is probably on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. And then try to call her before you send that message.
Exactly.
Kate Weir, thank you for going over quota.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Absolutely. Goodbye, everybody.